I'm really excited about today. This is completely different than what we've done in the past. We wanted to throw something out there that was different for you to participate in. The Q&A will be open today, so make sure that you're all aware that the Q&A is open. You can put your questions into that Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. We will be sending a document out to you. It's the recent response from Manulife about the budget, so you'll get that shortly in the chat. But I want to start off today with Frank and our guest speaker today, Beverly Krzmarcik is Krzmarcik, I think, Chris. Beverly. I knew I'd mess that up. Has been in business about 12 years, and she had the benefit of working with Frank recently. And I think we want to have a little discussion about how that went, how that happened, and what was the result. So you can all get a taste of what it's like to work with one of our advanced case specialists. They're very valuable, very knowledgeable, and we'll hear that story now. So I'm going to give it to you, Frank. Just tell us a little bit about how Beverly got in contact with you and what happened next, and then we'll ask Beverly what that experience was like.
Sure, Don. I had the pleasure of speaking with Beverly about basically a case where she says, Frank, I have a case that is far along, but it's basically on the personal side. It would be personally owned insurance on a husband and wife. And I think that this is a good opportunity for us to do a corporately owned policy. Would you like me to introduce you, or would you like to get engaged and help me on this? And I'm glad she did, because a lot came out of this. Forget about the actual insurance, which of course was important, but there was a lot of good that we did for this couple and actually their business partner that also fell into the benefits because of what Bev and I were able to suggest. So I'll put it back to you, Don.
So Beverly, how did you become aware of Frank, and how did you first engage with Frank and know it was a path that you wanted to embark on?
Yeah. Well, I guess I've heard about Frank's services through other advisors, but then particularly at the VP conference last year, where it was like, okay, you know what? I hadn't come across a lot of corporate cases yet, so it's just a great refresher to know that there are the extra hands out there. But then it was just a simple email. Hey, Frank, want to help? And then we got on a call and we figured out that it would work to work together on this. A very simple introduction, not too much leg pulling needed on either end. So.
And how did your clients receive the participation of somebody new to the appointment?
Oh, they welcome it. So I'm very frank with my clients that I am an expert at what I do, but I'm not an expert at everything. So they know that I bring in extensions into my office to make sure that they are getting the best service possible for all facets of their financial world. So when I can tell them that I can bring in a corporate tax and estate specialist, and that they're not getting, they're not paying them by the hour. They're very used to paying their CAs by the hour. So, the last few conversations of clients I've introduced to Frank, one of their best feedbacks is, wow, this is clear. I understand now in plain language what maybe the accountants have been trying to tell me for years, but I'm also not going to get an hourly bill for our half an hour conversation to get some clarity. Like, it's revolutionary. So just having that extension of my office to know that, there's certain expertise that I have, but that they value having that corporate head, that corporate expertise in the room. They really do.
Like, how do you know what sometimes you know what you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're getting into water that's a little deeper than you're really prepared to embark on.
Yep.
When do you realize that in this process? So you've been around for 12 years in the business, you know your clients pretty well, but you obviously got into a situation where it was a little more sophisticated than what you thought you could handle, or that the value of Frank would be an added value for your clients.
Yeah, I think this past year, last 2 years, I've really gone on a hunt to upgrade my clients. And with that, I was specifically not looking for business owners because I wasn't ready. And I know that's where my expertise lied. And but as I was getting these new clients, realizing that they are business owners, so they've kind of fallen into my lap. into a sense of, okay, well, then you know what? Then I'm just going to get better at it and bring in the experts that are needed, because I think that for me, that's the next, the next realm of my business is being able to assist the business owners. Because in my world, you know what? When you're running a household, you know what? You've got to work as efficiently as possible. So sometimes the business owner world is a very efficient, it can be a very efficient place to work. So, but yeah, they end up being corporate owners that, on the personal side, got it, not a problem. But then they're asking questions about the corporation, so I'm not going to leave them high and dry.
Yeah, the one thing that we find sometimes too is that, engaging with the advanced estate planning specialist, they help you carry that ball over the finish line. It's not like you're going in with somebody from another, like a carrier situation where you've got a guy who goes there, opens up the case, and then says, well, I'm not licensed. I really can't help you finish it. I can't go over the finish line with you necessarily.
Yeah.
How important is that for you? Like you were saying, balancing your life and juggling all the balls in the air. How important is it for you to have that person there with you by your side, going to the completion of that case?
Well, I mean, it's everything. Because we don't work for nothing. Not only, but for our benefit, also for theirs. Because if we're not clear and we're not articulate and we don't help them get across the finish line, well, then it's not a good use of their time either, right? Because we're there to really make a big difference in their world, and we will. So yeah, especially being able to make it as clear and concise as possible, and helping us to kind of get that, even with the underwriters, and understanding how they like to see corporate cases, what information they want up front to make it as seamless as possible, is obviously very important too. Because I think at the end of the day too, while the carriers can be a very good help on some of these advanced cases as well, I pride myself on being unbiased to the carrier. So when I'm bringing in an unbiased party to help just talk about the strategy, then it doesn't matter what carrier. They're not feeling like, oh, well, they brought in that guy because that's the product that they want to use. Well, it might be the right fit. It's a very different conversation when all parties involved, Frank and I are coming from a very sincere, unbiased scenario, not carrier specific as well.
Yeah, one of the values there too, and a support person for Frank actually is, of course, Nitin Bansal, who's joined us recently at IDC. We'll get to him in a few minutes, but I think that one thing that's really important is you, as an advisor, need to know the depth of the service and support that you have at an MGA. So I'd like to open this up. Somebody has a chat in here in a second. We'll go to there. But in the Q&A, if you have any questions to Beverly about the situation or the process of using a Frank or a Brad or a Chris, put those questions in the Q&A now. This is really we call this like a coffee chat. This is the idea of today. Is really, it's an opportunity to get to all of our advanced estate planning specialists, talking about how you can engage with them, the value added that they bring to the table as well. The other thing I'll come to you, Beverly, about is that, there's things like flow through shares, estate planning, estate freezes, those kinds of things. And then having the advanced estate planner there with you helps stir up some things that you may or may not have thought about in advance of that appointment. Would you say that would be a fair comment?
Absolutely. I think it's unlocked different opportunities that, I might have not, realized or thought, maybe just kind of thought over. But it definitely has unlocked. And even to the case that one of the cases we've been working on, it opened up the door even to the other business owner that I don't think I would have had access to otherwise. And now there's another case with him and his family, right? So there's definitely different opportunities that I wouldn't have seen, just because, again, it's not the lens that I view life in, right? So it's a huge value there.
And if I can just add, this is the classic case of us bringing something to the eyes of the owners of this business that should have been brought to them years ago. Right. And without getting too technical, it was just as simple as OpCo being held by unrelated parties, successful OpCo. And if you look at some of their personal holdings, they hold a huge real estate portfolio, the clients that Bev is dealing with. And, you step back and you say, well, why did we have to flush money out of an operating company and into your personal hands to do your investing? The group, the tax estate planning group, we're all big fans of build your corporate wealth. And most advisors say build wealth within your corporation So it was just about Bev and I first educating on why estate planning and owning a life insurance policy in OpCo didn't make sense. We didn't want to commingle because we have an unrelated party. That process basically showed why holdcos should be implemented with some restructuring. And through all of that, as Bev mentioned, the other side, the unrelated business owner, was also party to these discussions because he was going to be part of the reorg. And the nice fallout from that was that we actually did the same thing in life insurance that we did for the original party we were dealing with. We did it for that business owner that really didn't engage us at the beginning. So you take all of that and you say, well, why hasn't this happened with the accountant? Why didn't they do all of this? Because Bev and I did chat with the accountant, and competency is there. I can tell whether or not an accountant has the ability to implement something a little bit more advanced. So the competency is there. Why hasn't it happened? Why did it take so many years? And there could be whatever reason. It's not that I'm any smarter than that accountant. Maybe it's, as Bev says, maybe I put it in a way that they understood. I like to use PowerPoint and just to show pictures, and they got it. And the good fallout is that the accountant gets work from this as well. But most importantly, we did something really good for the structure of the business and for the long-term transition of the business eventually to the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that leads me to the other question about, Frank, sometimes advisors don't want to get in there and embarrass themselves by saying they don't know something. And rather than do that, they don't bring in someone like yourself. How do you encourage advisors to bring you in on these kinds of situations? What are you doing today that the advisors on the webinar today can benefit from? And how do I engage with Frank? When do I know it's time to engage with Frank?
I think Bev put it pretty simply. I don't put roadblocks. I'm always, at least this is coming from me, I'm biased, but I'm pretty open to a phone call, to a discussion. And, the thing that I like about Bev is that we've already gone on to a couple of cases. Another one, Bev, the dentist, I can use that reference. That one there was no insurance sale on the radar. You basically said, Frank, do you mind talking and just giving them some advice?
Yep.
And long behold, Bev and I were days away from closing a $50,000 premium on that.
Yep.
And then the opposite happened. Bev, we had that business owner who just lost her husband. And at the end of our discussion, the argument was, you probably should sell the business and not worry about capital gains tax. We were very honest and open to say, we don't have an insurance sale now, but we might have one after you sell the business. So it's just about Bev realizing, Frank's going to be himself. He's going to be very clear. And it's not always about the insurance sale. It's more so about educating my client, and kudos to Bev for recognizing that education is available. And again, it's a long-winded way for me to say, send me an email, call me on the phone, and that's the easiest way for us to connect.
Well, and I'll say too, because like you said, Frank, we have conversations. Sometimes you can help. Sometimes it's just a conversation to say, nope, this isn't, point blank, this is maybe what I'd recommend. And even that is very valuable. I know as from an advisor standpoint, I think we have to, if we want to grow our business, we can't live in a world of scarcity, right? So I am more than happy to share the pie if it means that my pie is going to grow bigger over time because I'm going to be better, right? So maybe it's just a young person in me talking, but I'm ready to take over the world. So it's I'm okay to share a little piece of the pie.
Well, particularly if it ends up doubling the size of the pie. I mean, if you go in there and you've got one partner that you have a relationship with and get introduced to another partner. So that leads me to two more questions for you, Frank. One is, how do you negotiate working with those accountants that they currently have and not, we don't want to embarrass the accountant. We want to ask those questions. Well, kind of, why isn't this set up already? Because I think business owners at the beginning, if you read the E-Myth, are focusing on building their business and don't really know the timeline as to where is this a opco and when should I have the holdco. I mean, that's the first thing. Secondly, they have an account that may or may not be experienced in those areas that you are a specialist in. So how do you negotiate not offending the current accountant and building that relationship with the partners and then getting to the other person's accountant?
So that's actually a really good question. It's an easy question. I think that with experience comes the ability to maneuver those situations. So I'd say that there's at least two very distinct situations. There's the one where the accountant is capable, they have a tax department or a tax person on hand that could do the reorg, and their response to us is, I've been suggesting this for years. It's not like you brought anything new to the table, so let's do it. And they're happy that they finally get to do the reorganization. And of course, with reorganization from the accountant's standpoint, that's extra billing. That's over and above their typical notice to reader, corporate tax return. So that's good work for them, and bring it on. I'm glad that Frank and Bev were able to put my clients over the finish line. I brought them 99% of the way because accountants aren't arrogant or anything like that. Frank and Bev, thanks for bringing them over the finish line. Then there's the other side where the accountant knows that they're in over their head, and they say, hey, listen, Frank, this is fantastic. If you could implement, and I say, no, absolutely not. That's not what I do anymore. But if you could actually refer them to someone, and please make sure that that someone doesn't steal my client for the day-to-day stuff. So that's typically what I've been dealing with. I don't get too much of the headbutting. Occasionally you get an accountant that may disagree with life insurance. And in my experience speaking to accountants, the disagreement is because they don't understand it. And it's easier to disagree than to agree and try to learn how insurance works. But those are far and few between. I think, I think for the most part, they want to work with us.
Yeah, I think in my experience too, in working with clients and accountants, is they may have had that accountant again since they started that business. They've been with them all those years. They're loyal to their accountant, and they don't really know that the advice that the accountant's currently giving them is still kind of old thinking advice. And the accountant may not be aware of some of those instances you're talking about in terms of the holdco or different things, the funding the buy sale. Everybody has a buy sale till you ask them, let me see your funding.
Well, Don, what's interesting, I address that by saying to people very politely, I think you may have outgrown your accountant. Just like the life cycle of your business has grown, you may have also outgrown that professional.
Right. So the question we have from the audience is that if you have a client situation and you feel the benefit from Frank, how do you start the process with a Frank or a Brad or a Chris? Is there a compensation split with the consultant? So we've addressed the contact. Just reach out, you send an email to Frank, Chris, or Brad, get engaged with them. Is there a split? Yes. Frank, do you want to address the split now, or do you do that on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, no, it's pretty simple. I won't actually say what the split is because the other gentleman may have a different way of splitting, but mine is very clear cut. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an accountant. It's a one pager, and I basically lay out based on FYC of the case. Here's what the share would be. And I've never had any pushback at the end of the day. As Bev has said, it's about closing the deal. And more importantly, I like Bev's approach. It's about servicing the client. At the end of the day, if she knows that she's going to service her client well, then she's happy to engage me and have that commission share.
Well, I think if, like you said, Bev, I think you put it really well in that scarcity and abundance, right? If you bring in a Frank, Chris, or Brad, and it turns into 2 or 3 deals or a much larger deal as a result, I don't think the split becomes a very non-issue at that point. I think that's a deal that you weren't going to get. Thanks
Happy
very
to
much,
share.
Bev. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bev.
Now joining us on stage is going to be Chris and Brad, who are patiently waiting in the background to participate. I'm going to take a couple of seconds just to introduce some of the people. Nitin's brand new to the company. I'm going to introduce you last, Nitin.
Okay.
I want to make sure that I give you Frank the due that he's owed. He's been with IDC now for how many years have you been with IDC now, Frank?
Myself, I've been since 2018 July, so coming on to 5 years.
There you go. With over 15 years of experience focused exclusively on the tax arena. His career in the industry commenced with Canada Life, whom he joined in 2005 as the estate planning consultant at the national level. And in 2012, Frank transitioned into management role, becoming the Ontario Regional Sales Director. I remember those days, Frank. And Frank's experience allows him to excel in the large case life insurance market. His background allows him to effectively communicate and promote concepts to clients accountants, and lawyers. And I have done some work with Frank personally, and he is awesome to work with, as I know Chris and Brad are as well, from the feedback that I've gotten from advisors out in the field. I'm going to introduce Brad quickly. Brad has been in the financial services industry for over 30 years working with advisors, 10 of those building successful practice in Ontario before moving to Alberta in 2003. And he's been sorry ever since. No, it doesn't say that. Sorry ever since. A self-proclaimed advisor to advisors. So there you go. He's in the field, from the field, works in the field, and has spent most of his 17 years helping advisors build their practices through a variety of supporting roles with various support channels to advisors. He's currently the Director of Tax and Estate Planning with IDC Worldsource in the Prairie region. So anything west of, pretty much anything west of Ontario, right, Brad?
Yeah.
So, and does a lot of work in the Alberta area and British Columbia. So if you, particularly, and I might say this for the Ontario people as well, if you have a reference question, all the folks on the line today are available to you for questions, brief questions, not casework unless it's a split deal, and questions, because there's lots of farms all across Canada, not just in the West. So Brad has quite an expertise in dealing with farmers. So if you have a farming or a farm owner question, intergenerational transfer of farms, those kinds of things, Brad would also, be a go-to person for you. But Frank is quite capable as well, as is Chris. But I think that's your specialty, really, Brad, eh? Would you say? You focus on that area a bit? I would say that. You might not. and then
farmers are business owners, so it's just business owners.
Business owners. Well, there's some different exemptions and things that are available to farmers that we all wouldn't necessarily know. But anyway, Chris Britton, over 20 years of industry experience. Chris brings a wealth of tax planning experience. Directly prior to joining IDC Winnie, he held positions as a national state tax planning consultant with Canada Life, with a specialization in owner, manager, high net worth, and professional services markets. Again, we spent a lot of time with Chris across Canada. I should tell you that he enjoys the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's in Toronto once a month, I think, watching hockey games with his kids. Great family man and a real asset to IDC and to you out there in the East Coast. And primarily, Chris works in the Maritimes. And again, though, as I said, is sometimes available for Q&A if you have a quick question. Nitin Bansal is our newest member to the team, and Nitin has been with IDC for how long, Nitin? About 8 months, I think?
Closer to 10 months now, yeah.
10 months as a director of actuarial support. And prior to joining IDC, he spent 12 years at Sun Life Financial in various roles, most recently as the director of non-par and traditional life and health valuation. His experience includes 6 years of pricing in various insurance and segregated fund products, including 2 years of working with high net worth clients and individuals, customized solutions to meet their insurance needs. The other thing I would say is that because Nitin's role is so new to IDC, we're really kind of exploring what he is doing, what he will be doing. But Nitin, can you give us just a brief little synopsis of what you're currently working on today and how people from the field would be able to use your expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting in the last 10 months. It's been huge learning experience. I've been meeting a lot of great people. A lot of people have just been reaching out, sort of getting a lot of product type questions. People who aren't really experts on universal life or par insurance, try to get into the nitty gritty and into those details. We're looking at comparing different carriers, for example, on par. Look at their product features. They all have different unique features, and how does that play into what the clients are looking for? These can go into details such as start and stop of ADO payments, looking at explaining what kind of goes into that par fund, what goes into a dividend, for example, or explaining differences between estate and wealth type products. I've been involved in some other cases as well, some high net worth cases out west, and it's really just on a consulting basis. It's kind of give me a call, let me run some ideas, bounce ideas off each other. I'm not an advisor. I'm still learning. I'm still learning the ropes. But let's see if we can kind of come up with a solution that can work out better. Let's see if we can look at stress testing. I'm an actuary. I look at risk. Let's sensitivity test these concepts to see where does this break for your client and where can it be supported and what can we do to sort of solve those situations. I've had some calls in the past as well, just to bounce ideas off each other. Is my math correct? Am I presenting this right? Am I correct in saying this versus this on an IRR calculation or on a death benefit calculation. And then one of the most recent cases we had that was a really big success was an in-force illustration. And, things weren't really lining up between what the in-force illustration was saying versus what we were seeing from the carrier. So I was able to take a look at the illustration, use some of my contacts as well, kind of work with the carrier as well. And we received a product exception, kind of got a resolution for the client to what we were looking for.
Yeah, I think that comes up more and more. Is like you're wondering, am I going with the right company in a situation, whether it be, joint last to die or, one of the big things that we get hung up in as advisors is the dividend performance. So the par dividend. And I think that the exploration needs to be a little bit deeper than just the par dividend, because you can help me explain this, Nitin, because most companies calculate their par dividend differently and apply the dividend differently to their insurance product. So although someone might have a higher dividend published, it might not necessarily mean that policy, because the PUAs are more expensive, or there's more cash value, there's less cost of insurance. There's different factors than just the dividend. Would you like to comment on that briefly?
Yeah, because one of the most common questions I've heard, or statements I've heard, is that, the dividend yield is what I'm earning on my par policy, and that's a false statement. That you need to be very careful on how you're presenting that dividend scale interest rate. And the dividend scale interest rate is really one component to the total dividend calculation. I'm not going to go too much into details as well into that, but yeah, every carrier has their own calculation, their own assumptions. We're looking at mortality assumptions, lapse assumptions, what the experience sort of plays out. They all have a different underlying fund that's going to earn something different, and all of that sort of plays in. And that's where I can try to help explain to advisors, to kind of help them explain to their clients, to making sure that what's being said hopefully is correct and not misleading.
Okay, great. And now, just it should be noted too that Nitin, to use you, how do I get a hold of you if I have a case I'm working on? I'm doing some comparisons between, let's just say, a Manulife or a Sun Life, and I'm not sure which way to go. And I'm looking at YRT 100 versus a whole life or something else. How do I get a hold of you? Yeah,
best way for me is contacting me through email or giving me a phone call. I'm not sure if Lisa can put my details in the chat as well.
Yep.
But if honestly, contact your BDE or any of your IDC rep that you currently work with, and they know how to get in contact with me.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll get some reaction from you in a few minutes from the budget, but I know that we're always we had a previous call obviously to prepare for this meeting today, and we always get a little bit of a chuckle because we're always excited about when the budget comes out, because there's big things coming in the budget, and we're always worried about our world, the insurance world, and what effect the budget will have on that. And then we're always disappointed. There's been very little change, and I think that this current budget's really no different than any of the previous budgets. But I'd like to go around the horn here and get a commentary from each of us about just generally about the budget. Then we'll go into some specific areas of the budget. But Frank, what was your expectation of the budget, and what was your impression of the budget, just briefly?
I think that most of us expected that the country needs revenue, and the budget lacked that bite of revenue that we expected. Rates didn't change, so personal tax rates, corporate tax rates didn't change, capital gains rates didn't change. So really, we kind of stepped back and said, what happened here? Revenue was needed, and that revenue base wasn't increased. Gladly so, I guess, but when will that happen? I'm not certain. I'll leave it to the other guys to make their comments.
Yeah, Brad, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as Frank. They're expecting some changes on things like capital gains, inclusion rates, and maybe something to do with surplus stripping. And we just didn't see any of that. And it's what's coming, right? And my opinion is that maybe they're not announcing it in the budget, but they're going to do it something like what they did in 2016, and maybe introduce something over the summer, or there's got to be somewhere where they're going to drive some revenue out of the what they're targeting, which is the high net worth clients. That's
Chris, we're always seeing that left foot, right foot. So yeah, we saw a lot of focus on green energy, credits to the green side of the world and making the planet a better place. In terms of our pocketbooks, they haven't really taken anything more from us, but you can almost expect, Chris, that right foot to drop. Are you expecting anything to happen over the course of the summer in terms of where are they going to get the money to pay for some of these things that they've just instituted?
Well, without getting too political, I don't think that the current government cares how much money they spend. And I think that they've already spent a pile of political capital going after the business owners. So I feel like until they get elected again, they might leave that alone. I mean, I agree with Frank and Brad. I expected something. That was probably the government that came and got me up.
It is
you're being censored.
Yeah, which wouldn't surprise me.
So nothing really happening.
No,
that's what I'm saying. It was like a no budget, really. A couple of minor things we'll address in a second. But Nitin, any reaction on your side from the budget that was recently launched?
From an actuarial perspective, there wouldn't be anything that would concern me. I do get tax questions sometimes. I'm not a tax expert. I do have some resources, but like I told people, my 3 top resources that I have is Frank, Brad, and Chris. So
there you go. Well, the one thing that they did do is they played around a little bit with a few things. I've got a couple of notes here in terms of first home savings account. So I just again read another article this morning that Desjardins is trying to get something set up. So they launched this end of last year, said they're going to put it in place this year, and there aren't any institutions ready for it. They're taking pre acknowledgement of it now, and at some of the institutions, but they really don't have the product. What was your thoughts? I'll go to you. Let's see here. I'm going to go to you, Chris, about that first time home buyer savings account. Any commentary there?
Well, I think that anyone who's saving for a house, it's a really good tool for them to be able to use. Obviously, it needs to be like a registered account, so the financial institutions have to have the ability to track it. But anyone saving for a house, I think it's a really good flexible tool that they probably should be using.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome tool if you're in that that 25 to 30 year age group, I guess, saving up for your first home. But the institutions, why do you think there's such a lag in the institutions being ready to actually receive the money towards these programs or that program? Anybody?
Well, I think they wanted a little bit of clarification around the roles, number one. Number two, although it's, I don't know, it's probably an expensive process for them to go through, and it's a time consuming process. And the benefit to them, it's capped at kind of like a $40,000 contribution amount, and it's only for people who haven't already owned a home before. So, I mean, I don't know how much uptake they're going to get. And even in the 25 to 30-year-old range of people who are saving for a house, they still need to be able to save, which, in the current economic environment is going to be a small portion of those.
Anybody else? Any comment?
Yeah, I'll make a comment on it. I think from some of the work that I've done with some of the carriers in the past, whenever products like this get launched, it takes a little bit of time for them to decide whether or not they want to participate, right? Because the size, as Chris has already mentioned, the size of the accounts aren't very big. So to set up the administrative systems and everything else to handle it, it's time consuming and costly. So I think you're going to see, a smaller subset of players in the market that are going to have these accounts. And typically it's just going to be the banks that are going to do it. And they're going to almost be forced to do it, right? Because somebody is going to walk into the bank and say, I want this product. And if they don't have it, they're going to move their accounts to another bank, right? That's the risk, right? So I don't think that it's anything more than that. And, Chris, I agree with you as far as, the carriers that are going to produce these products, we're waiting for the rules, right? Like, what is this actually going to do and how does it tie to other things? Because one of the things with the FSHA is If you don't use it as an FSHA and you've saved the money in the account, after 15 years, you can actually roll that into your RSP. So how do I do that? Now, can I do that into any RSP, or can I just do it into one that's with that institution that has that product? Right. So those are going to be some of the things that they're figuring out.
Don, I just want to add to this, because I don't think that we actually talked about how beneficial these rules are. And I'm sorry if we did, but I'm just going to high level summarize. $8,000 a year to $40,000, as Chris mentioned.
Yep.
Tax deduction on the way in.
Yep.
Tax-free growth in the plan. And then when we use those funds to buy our first house, we withdraw them tax-free. So it's like an RSP, but better, because we get the tax deduction up front, but we have no tax inclusion when we pull the money out to buy our first home. And as Brad mentions, if at year 15 we haven't bought our home, then we'll roll that into an RSP. I don't think I'd want, if it were my children, I don't think I'd want them to roll it into an RSP, because then, of course, when it comes out of the RSP or RIF, it'll be taxable. So that's good that the government is directing us towards helping us buy that first home. So yeah, like an RSP, but just 100 times better, because there's no taxation on the way out.
Well, and yeah, Frank, just to continue on with the comments on that, I mean, if you've got two young people that do these FSHA programs, and they each accumulate 40,000 of contributions plus their growth, now your down payment combined on your first home could be enough to not be a CMHC loan, right? So the program is good. It's not set up to take a ton of money, but I think that anybody that is looking at buying a home in the future, if they haven't been if they qualify for the program, they should be putting money into it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a great starter. Like in your first home, it's a starter. It's a place to start saving for that down payment on that first home. And as we know, the price of real estate's been going up exponentially over the last few years. We'll probably see a rebound in that a little bit, or a downtick in that a bit. We've seen it the last few 6-7 months, I guess. But geographically, depending on where you are, there hasn't been a downtick. There's, it just continually goes up. So, people getting into a first home, it's a great opportunity if they can start saving that money, or have their parents give them some money to put into that, the homeowner's plan, savings plan. One of the things that someone's commented on here is that if we don't get those young clients, or if they go to the bank, I mean, we lose those clients potentially, right? We have to, in the insurance business, offer those plans to those young folks, because we want to establish a relationship with them early, because they're already getting attacked by the bank continually. And as I said earlier in my earlier comments, Desjardins working on launching one right now as well. So there are other insurance companies that are come to the table with that. One question we've got here is, what is the plan for OAS changes to start payouts to age 67? And are you aware of any government programs geared to help age 90 plus with home care aids? Did you notice anything in the budget on that?
I didn't.
No. I didn't either. I'll have to take another closer look at that. But and someone else commented, so that the registered homeowner savings account, or first home savings account, is like an RRSP and a TFSA hybrid. Well, I mean, you can max out your TFSA and still do the first home savings account. So it's a little bit specific.
And I think where the market for this is as we've said, with younger clients, and it may be where they put their money instead of into RSPs, because they don't need as much of the deduction on their lower incomes that they have at younger ages. Right. So I think where this will start out, and I think that's why they made the ability to transfer into the RSP, is they expect that people will put this in their FSHA before they do an RSP.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, the RSP, you can catch up those payments too, right? You can, in your later years when you're making some higher income and you are in a higher tax bracket, you might want to take advantage of an RSP if that's
so I think that's where the strategy might be for the advisors out there.
All right. Now that's the only other thing was the registered educational savings plans. We noticed some increasing in limits to the withdrawal and the contribution limits to those things. Anybody want to respond to that? Chris, you got any comments about the RESP?
Well, they just increased the amount that you could withdraw on an annual basis on the taxable side. So
Right.
you went from 5,000 to 8,000, which, I guess will be helpful for you want to get as much of the taxable amounts out to the students as you can, because typically they won't have to pay any tax.
Yeah, they're usually at a low tax bracket when they receive that money out, right? Just looking at the comments that we talked about earlier as well, is like we mentioned it at the beginning of the call about I think Brad, it was you that talked about surplus stripping, and I don't want to get into a webinar on surplus stripping because that'll be an hour and a half. But can you explain a little bit about that briefly?
Basically, what a surplus strip is?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, like, one of the things that we have right now is this disparity between capital gains tax rates and dividend rates. So if I can remove money out of my corporation and characterize it as a capital gain, I'm paying a much lower tax rate than if I'm paying a dividend, regardless of whether that's an eligible or a non-eligible dividend. So the surplus stripping process is basically a reorganization of things within your company so that you can extract money at capital gains rates. I don't want to get into any more real detail on how the mechanics of that really works, but that's the general reason for it and why we're seeing it.
Another question that came up while we were answering that one was that did the first homeowners savings plan rollover of unused funds into an RSP mention the possibility of rollover to an RDSP? I didn't see anything in a rollover to an RDSP.
I haven't seen anything in the rules on that.
Yeah. Well, as you said earlier, we're going to have a follow-up webinar on that. We're going to be reaching out to Vic Ray to talk a little bit about that. There are, of course, someone else commented about other institutions getting the programs. There obviously will be other institutions offering those programs because they don't want to miss out on that potential accumulation of cash. So we'll be looking forward to seeing who's rolling it out first and when it's all about to come out. Someone commented that they think RBC brought one out recently. Again, I don't think they're actually in place just yet. Haven't heard of anybody having one in place, but I could be wrong. We'll find out though and send answers out to the people that participated in the webinar. Just going to check questions here. If you have any questions that you want to ask any of our panelists, please type those questions in the Q&A now. It'd be great.
Don, I'm going to make a quick comment on the surplus strip.
Sure.
As Brad mentioned, we're basically getting ourselves capital gains rates instead of dividend rates. And in Ontario, the difference and the tax savings is about 20%. But I'll tell you, it's become such a household strategy in terms of everybody talking about it. And I'm sure the gentleman on this call would agree, it's not cheap to implement. It's not cheap. So the professionals that are actually implementing these strategies are charging decent fees. And why I'm going there is to say that you're not going to implement a capital gain strip for a potential 100,000 or 200,000 or maybe even 300,000, right? If you're saving 20% and you did it on $500,000, you'd be saving $100,000 of tax minus the fees to implement. So just keep that in mind, because I hear everyone under the sun talking about maybe doing a capital gain strip. And, it's not necessarily warranted for everyone.
Okay,
Agreed,
good
Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Chris, I'm going to go to you for a second on the intergenerational share transfers.
Yep.
So one of the things that they've done is they've changed those rules a little bit. And doesn't necessarily affect us in our world today, but it is important to know that they might be doing some, so when you transfer from parent to child, the implication of those changes. Could you address that briefly?
Sure. So there's a rather punitive section in the Income Tax Act. It's 84.1, sorry. And, KLU's done a lot of work in behind the scenes, politically trying to get the government to change the rules. So basically 84.1, if I was going to sell my business to Frank, Frank would probably go incorporate a company. He would borrow the money and then his company would buy the shares from me. And therefore we've got debt inside Frank's company. And on a go-forward basis, as the company he bought earns income and we pay tax at 10, 11%, we can pay a dividend up to Frank's company, and Frank's company can use 88 dollars to repay his debt. If my daughter wanted to buy my company and my daughter did the exact same transaction, so she goes and incorporates a company and goes and gets a loan and buys my shares from me, then 84.1 kicks in, and that capital gain that I triggered is actually recharacterized as a dividend. So I can't claim my capital gains exemption. And in fact, I pay tax at dividend rates instead of capital gains rates. So it's, it's very, very punitive. So in situations where we have a true intergenerational transfer and my daughter's actually going to take over my business, those tax rules are extremely unfair. Because why should I be able to do a transaction with Frank and not one with my daughter and receive the same tax treatment? Well, the reality is that if the 84.1 wasn't there, I could maybe have a nefarious transaction with myself and another company, trigger my gains exemption, pay a tax-free dividend up to the holding company, and extract my capital gains exemption out of my company tax-free without there actually really being an intergenerational transfer. So 84.1 is in place to restrict the ability to do that. In 2021, there was a bill put forward into the House called Bill 208 that they got pushed through that basically allowed for intergenerational transfers in 84. There was an exemption put in place, and the exemption was pretty wide open. It had some restrictions on it, but not significant restrictions. And I do know that there was some nefarious transactions that have gone on in the meantime to kind of extract capital gains exemption out to the business owner without there being a true intergenerational transfer. The government basically at the time said they didn't like the new rules. They were going to review them though, because they wanted to make sure whatever they put in place was quote unquote fair. So they did some, they had a consultation period. And so they brought in these new rules that if we have a true intergenerational transfer, without getting too technical, there's two ways you can basically fit into it and still get your gains exemption, but there actually needs to be a transfer of control and ownership. And then there's an immediate rule that you can fit in under, which is like within 36 months. And then there's a gradual one that's over 10 years.
Yeah, and I've got the article here as well, and some of the commentary from some of the pundits in the business about the budget, and that's one of the focuses of this particular budget, where they did get back and relook at that. If you have any situations like that, I mean, this is the team to reach out to follow up on it. Obviously, Chris is very knowledgeable about this area of that budget. If you need to reference somebody or call somebody on it, Chris Britton is the guy to call. I'm going to finish off today with the one thing that's just recently came out earlier this week. We saw my gift from Canada Life. So a unique product out in the marketplace. So hoping to pick up lots of opportunities there. I'd like you to respond, or what your thoughts are in that particular product and where it might be used. So I think what we'll do here is Chris, actually, let's go with you, Chris. Not Chris, sorry. Brad. I want to go to Brad. Brad,
I thought you were going to start with Nitin and talk about the product.
Well, I could do that too. Nitin, you haven't spoken for a while. Let's go to you.
There you go.
Okay. On that warm up. What are you thinking of that new product, My Gift?
Yeah, it's an interesting product, right? And for those who don't know about it, it's a guaranteed single pay par product that's owned by the charity, and the charity is also the beneficiary. So when you do that single pay, you get that full deduction up front. For your a donation deduction, and because the charity is the owner of the policy, they control the policy. They control how the dividends are being used. They control how they want to take paid up petitions versus cash. But because again it's charity owned, they actually the way this product differs from a normal par product is it's actually a non-exempt policy, which doesn't really have any consequences for a charity, and that's how they're able to do this single deposit. It's a true single pay. There's no offsetting. There's no withdrawable premium fund where the premiums are going into. Like looking at the values, it's still really early. I'm doing my own analysis right now, but it does provide some strong death benefit values and some high early cash value as well for the charity.
Where do you see the opportunity for the advisors that are on the line today? where do you see the opportunity for them? Like, what would you suggest that they do in terms of the utilization of that particular product?
Yeah, I think if the scenario is something that's that you're looking into, and I'll let Frank, Brad, and Chris talk about the tax deductions that you're getting, and is it really worth it? But I can speak to it from a product perspective. Is that if this is something that you are considering, you're looking at a charitable donation of your life insurance policy, it differs in the sense that you don't have to pay the premiums every year and assign the beneficiary later if you want to donate the death benefit as well. So, but I'll let Frank, Brad, and Chris talk about the tax component of that product.
Okay. And who on the tax side wants to pick up the gauntlet?
Well, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I haven't actually seen any live examples yet, but I mean, the concept of it makes sense to me. Especially from the charity side, because I've dealt with charities in the past, and sometimes when people donate life insurance policies to charities, it becomes a nightmare for the charity, because maybe they get 3 or 4 years into, the client paying premiums, and then all of a sudden the client changes their mind and doesn't want to pay the premiums anymore. So now the charity needs to do an analysis as to whether or not they think the policy is still, one that is a good investment for them long term. Like, should they pick up the premiums, or the charity doesn't have to worry about tracking down the donor every year to make sure the premium's getting paid. This is a one and done, and the charity knows that it's paid up. The charity is going to have access to the cash value while the donor's alive. They can choose to take the dividends in cash as opposed to buying paid up additions, and the charity won't have any tax implications because they're a nonprofit, so they don't pay tax. But I don't think that it's the be all and end all for charitable giving. Like, I think that you need to analyze each scenario on a case by case basis to determine what's best for the client and best for the charity. So, for instance, it's great that the client can get a deduction today. Maybe the client doesn't really have big annual income, but they have a giant tax liability in their estate because they have a big capital gain. So maybe they would prefer to have the big giant tax deduction on the death benefit in their estate as opposed to annually on their, as a one-time tax deduction while they're alive. The other thing to consider is, there's rules around tax deductions, and sometimes I don't know that everyone's aware of them, but you can only deduct 75% of you can only take a charitable donation of up to 75% of your taxable income while you're alive. In the year of death, that's 100%. So you can actually make all of your tax on your final tax return go away with a charitable donation. You can't do that while you're alive. Now, if you can't use all of your charitable donation in the year you make it, you can carry it forward for 5 years. With corporations, it's actually a deduction, so it's not a credit. So personally, it's a credit. After the first $200, it's basically the top marginal tax bracket. In a corporation, it's a deduction. So if you're making a corporate gift with one of these, and it's an active business, you might only be getting 11% tax savings if it's in the low tax bracket. Whereas if it's investment income, you might be getting it at 50, depending on your province, 50 to 52%. So I think it's a good tool to have in your toolkit. And I think that there's application in certain situations for sure. I think it's very interesting, but I'd just be careful to flaunt it to everybody and anybody who wants to make a charitable donation.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Chris. And what I would say to that is that's if you're looking at doing one of those policies, that's absolutely an ideal time to bring one of us in to have a more fulsome discussion around where does the tax credit sit best for this particular client, and what should we be setting up for that situation.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is that I was on a webinar earlier today, and the question always becomes, what if you do the one and done, and then 5 years later the charity changes direction, or the focus of that organization changes direction, and you don't agree with that direction, you can't go back and undo what you did in that one and done. So that's the first thing, I guess. The other thing is that the quotes right now are only available on a direct basis, so you have to get a hold of the carrier to get the quote. And the other thing is there are donor advised funds, I guess. There's a collective where you can put it in as a donor to that particular group of charities as opposed to the one single charity. So I think there's lots to explore here. And I know I mentioned it today because two things. One is we were on the schedule. We had identified that we wanted to talk about RCAs and IPPs, and we found out in our pre-call that it's a more elaborate conversation than we wanted to have today on this particular call. This is really our first call where we wanted to get the team out in front of you to let you know, first of all, what it is they do, how you can access them, and then you can talk to each of them about their specific expertise in a Q&A or a question, and then you can go to your regional advanced case specialist to take them with you on a call. Nitin's available as a free of charge service to you. Right now, he's available to anybody across Canada. He does analysis between, is it the right company to go with? You might be thinking this particular company, and maybe after his analysis, you might not end up going with that company because this one's better. So he can give you an objective viewpoint as to which company you might want to go with in presenting your case to your client. I would say that. The other thing is, I think we'll follow up with another webinar in the near future about IPPs, RCAs, and IFAs. The promo piece that we put together was, our IFAs, is it worth it to do one right now based on interest rates going up? Does anybody right now want to comment on that, whether an IFA, is it a good time for an IFA or a bad time for an IFA? Is it the right time?
Don, I can speak.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I can speak to that just because I'm still engaged in IFAs, and to me, IFA is just the ability to borrow against something good. And sorry to really make this simple, but if I back up to what we're doing, we're implementing life insurance solutions. The IFA is something that we can add on top of it. Now, I say that because if we have a real estate portfolio and we need that 5 million or that 2 million or that $1 million, whatever the number is in terms of liquidity on death, well, we need that life insurance policy, and that premium has to be paid. So if the premium is paid and the premium is, call it $100,000, and the cash is needed back into the business, then an IFA still works in the sense that, yeah, I'd rather spend $6,700 or $6,500 in interest payment in year one than spending $100,000. I got my $100,000 cash flow right back. I pay $6,500. Prime is around 6.5. So I paid $6,500. That's deductible, and I'm down to about $3,200 now of actual cost. So my outflow was $3,200 versus $100. If I think about that all the way through, even at year 10, when I've borrowed $1 million, my cost is $62,000 in interest. Back out the deduction. If we're at the high corporate rate, we're down to $32,000. So I use that because that's the discussion I'm having. Is it as easy a sell versus when prime rates were at 3? No, absolutely not. But if you have the client understand that perhaps they should be making, and not perhaps, I illustrate showing paying the interest each year. Where you get in a bit of a pickle is when you show capitalization of that interest. And that capitalization starts to happen at a rate that might be very close to the increase in cash surrender value. That's when IFAs don't make sense anymore. I've never illustrated in that fashion. I do know that clients will tap in over and above the full $1 million that they've put in, but that's not necessarily what I'm trying to get them to understand. I'm trying to get them to understand that IFA is basically a cheaper cost of insurance than just paying the premium.
Yeah, one of the ways that I would agree with you, Frank, and one of the ways that I talk about IFAs is I don't like the title immediate finance because it doesn't really do much for what we're talking about. I talk about it more as a cash flow management structure, right? And that's really what we're doing is we're just managing where our cash flows are within the business and where does it make sense to get the most deductions and still get the insurance that you need to have in place for exactly what you're talking about. So.
And the only thing I would add is that I think right now it's an unfair environment to be illustrating, interest rates at 6.5% and par returns at current scale. Because if interest rates stay at 6.5%, all of the power funds are going to have a higher dividend scale on a go-forward basis. So, you're showing 6.5% interest rates and a cash flow with an IRR on it like 35 years from now. That's not realistic. So, and I would argue that 2 years ago, you were showing something that wasn't realistic either, because you were showing it at interest rates that wouldn't support the dividend scale in the current environment. So, I think in the next year, the dividend rates will catch up a little bit, but they're still not going to catch up to a spot where, they're 4 points higher than where they were. So, I mean, it doesn't matter which insurance company it is, as their fixed income portfolios roll over, they're going to be able to replace them at higher interest rates. So you got to be careful when you're, in my view, when you're illustrating IFAs, because, and you got to really understand what the product is and how the product works.
Yeah.
Well, and how risk sensitive the prospect or client is as well, right?
Yeah.
To your point, Chris, though, like we were talking about par dividend scales are going to go increase. A lot of people it's not going to go up tomorrow, right? Like
No.
it's only a certain amount of their fixed income is rolling over each year. It could be between 3 and 10%, and agree they're going into a higher rate. So it is going to be gradual. And that's sort of why my opinions of IFAs, it's important to stress test different scenarios as well, and making sure that, are you comfortable if an interest rate were to go up by another percent? Are you able to make those interest payments, or are those interest payments going to balloon beyond your control?
Right. And your point's well taken, because the dividend rates didn't come down as fast as interest rates did either, right? There's a lag on both ends.
Yeah, and most of the products have limits on how far they'll move their dividend on an annual basis built into the contracts. So,
well, gentlemen, that brings us to the end. We're just over 2:00, so I didn't want to keep you any longer, or the audience any longer than we promised. So, wanted to thank you very much for your participation. This was enlightening, and it obviously shows you guys are on top of the budget. You know what's going on out in the road and the field. So, if you have a case, like I said, you're working on, or if you have a client that might be a little deeper than you need, or you have the expertise to handle, you can reach out to our advanced estate planning specialists, and they will help you and guide you through that case. I know Frank can't wait to get out there with his yellow pad and ask the questions. That was a bit of a joke. One thing about webinars, you don't hear anybody laugh. Sorry, Frank. I always ask Frank. The reason I said that is have you got a couple of questions we can go out there with? He goes, no, there's nothing. I go,
my blank piece of paper.
A blank piece of paper. It's an open conversation, and that's why I think that most clients and prospects feel unthreatened by people like Frank, Brad, and Chris. They go out there with an open mind, and what they're necessarily going out to talk about, IFAs might be an example. They end up not necessarily doing an IFA, but making a large life insurance sale that isn't an IFA. Not a bad thing. If these gentlemen can help you increase and double your sales, then I would engage them every chance that I got. So thanks again for everybody being on the call today.